In the cold, dark days of mid-20th century Europe, a world shattered by totalitarianism, devastating world wars, and the existential horror of the atomic bomb, a young writer emerged from the sun-drenched coast of North Africa to offer humanity a radical, defiant message, even in a silent, indifferent universe. Human joy, love, and moral courage are worth fighting for. This is the life of Albert Camus. Albert Camus was not an ivory tower academic crafting abstract theorems in quiet isolation. He was a working class journalist, a passionate athlete, a fighter in the anti-Nazi resistance, and a philosopher who insisted that philosophy was utterly meaningless unless it was lived out in the real world. Born on November 7th, 1913, in the working class district of Mondovi in French Algeria, Camus grew up in severe poverty. He never truly knew his father, Lucien, an agricultural worker who was mobilized into World War I and killed at the Battle of Marne when Albert was only 9 months old. Raised by his mother, Catherine, a partially deaf woman who was illiterate, who cleaned houses to feed her family, young Albert lived in a crowded, lightless apartment in Belcourt, Algiers. They had no indoor plumbing, no books, and no electricity. Yet outside that cramped apartment lay the Mediterranean Sea and the golden Algerian sun. For young Albert, the beach was a kingdom. He found immense joy in the physical world, throwing himself into sports, particularly football, playing as a goalkeeper for the Racing Universitaire d'Alger. He loved the raw teamwork, the physical discipline, and the absolute clarity of the pitch. He would later famously declare, "All that I know most surely about morality and obligations, I owe it to football." At school, his extraordinary intellect caught the attention of his teacher, Louis Germain, who recognized the boy's rare genius and fought to secure him a scholarship to the high school in Algiers. Camus was on track to become an academic and an athlete, but at age 17, catastrophe struck. He was diagnosed with severe tuberculosis, which at the time was a violent, incurable disease that forced him out of sports, separated him from his family, and placed him face to face with his own morality and fragility. Faced with the fragile brevity of human existence, Camus turned inward to literature and philosophy and asked the central question that would define his life's work: how do we find meaning in a world where death can claim us at any moment without reason? In 1940, with the shadow of the World War II falling over Europe, Camus moved to Paris. It was during these dark, uncertain years that he published the two masterpieces that launched him onto the global stage: his first novel, The Stranger, Al Strangier, and his philosophical essay, The Myth of Sisyphus. In these works, Camus articulated his famous concept of the absurd. The absurd, he explained, is not simply that life is meaningless. It is the friction created when human beings desperately search for purpose, order, and meaning, while the universe responds with absolute cold silence. For many thinkers, this realization led to nihilism or despair, but Camus vehemently rejected surrender. To illustrate his alternative, he pointed to the ancient Greek myth of Sisyphus, a man condemned by the gods to roll a massive boulder up a mountain for eternity, only to watch it roll back down to the bottom every single time. Camus argued that Sisyphus is not a tragic victim, but a triumphant hero. In the exact moment Sisyphus turns to walk back down the mountain to retrieve the stone, he accepts his fate with conscious awareness, defiance, and passion. He owns his task. By refusing to give up, Sisyphus conquers the absurdity of his punishment. As Camus famously concluded, the struggle itself toward the heights is enough to fill a man's heart. One must imagine Sisyphus happy. Camus did not just write about revolt, he put his life on the line for it. During the Nazi occupation of France, he joined the underground French resistance operating under the code name Boiscurt he became the principal editor of Combat, an illegal underground newspaper. Every issue was printed in secret basements, distributed at the risk of execution, and carried Camus' sharp, urgent calls for human dignity, truth, and resistance against tyranny. When the World War II ended and Europe was liberated, Camus emerged as a hero of the intellectual world. Shortly after, he published The Plague, La Peste, a gripping novel about a town quarantined by a deadly contagion. It served as a powerful allegory for fascism, occupation, and the collective duty of human beings to stand together against suffering even when victory seems impossible. Yet as the Cold War split the world into opposing ideological camps, Camus refused to blindly fall in line with the political doctrine in 1951. To show this, he published The Rebel, El Homne Revolté, a searing critique of revolutionary violence, totalitarianism, and authoritarian communism. He argued that no noble goal justifies the mass murder of innocent human beings. This stance infuriated the French left-wing intellectual establishment, leading to a bitter, high public feud with his former friend Jean-Paul Sartre, as you know, is also a very famous philosopher and author. Camus was ostracized by his Parisian elite, but he remained steadfast in his refusal to trade human ethics for political expediency. His pain deepened with the outbreak of the Algerian War of Independence in the mid-1950s, caught between his love for his native Algerian homeland and his ties to the French Algerian community. Including his own mother, who still lived there, Camus called for peace, civilian protection, and reconciliation. His nuanced stance pleased neither side, leaving him politically isolated and emotionally heartbroken, for both of his love had abandoned him. In 1957, at 44 years old, Albert Camus was awarded the Nobel Prize in Literature for illuminating work, shedding light on the problems of the human conscience. He was one of the youngest recipients in Nobel history. In his acceptance letter, he dedicated the honor to those who struggle for freedom and truth in a chaotic world. Tragically, just 3 years later, on January 4, 1960, Albert Camus' life came to a sudden, shocking end. While returning to Paris after the holiday season, the car driven by his publisher and close friend Michael Gallimard veered off the road and crashed into a tree. Camus was instantly killed at the age of 46. Now in his pocket was an unused train ticket. He had originally planned to travel by rail with his family, but had decided at the last minute to ride in the car instead. A haunting, absurd end for the philosopher of the absurd. In his briefcase at the crash site, investigators found the unfinished manuscript of his autobiographical novel, The First Man, a tender reflection on his poverty-stricken childhood in Algiers. Albert Camus left behind a legacy that transcends academic philosophy. He did not offer easy answers, he did not offer religion, and he did not offer political utopias. Instead, he offered something far more durable, a call to live and to embrace the cruelty, to live deeply and to love deeply, and to stand against cruelty no matter how much resistance you face, and to embrace the world despite its flaws. He taught us that no matter how cold the surrounding world may be, the capacity for warmth remains within us. As he wrote famously in one of his most timeless passages, "In the midst of winter, I found there was within me an invincible summer, and that makes me happy, for it says that no matter how hard the world pushes against me, within me there's something stronger, something better, something more stronger pushing back." Albert Camus will always be remembered for his novels, but what remains most fascinating about him is his philosophy of absurdism. Absurdism, described in the best way possible, was the fact to stand at the edge of morality, to look the world and the entire existence of the universe in its face, and to call it absurd because of its absolute cold silence, was the deep, dark base of absurdism. Absurdism was very different from nihilism, which people often confuse it with, or call it a child of. Absurdism didn't say that life is meaningless. It said life is so absurd that when we create our own meaning, we will be met with absurd circumstances such that we cannot even have dreamt of. But at the end of the day, we don't know if Albert Camus was right, but we do know he is a literary giant that will always be remembered for his works. This was the life of Albert Camus.